Welcome GibbsCAM users. Beginning in 2025, we're going to start offering tutorials for those just beginning to learn GibbsCAM. Maybe you just purchased GibbsCAM and just need to start learning, or you have a new employee and trying to get them on board and get them started. What we'll do is the classes will incrementally build on what you have learned and then progressively get more advanced as you go so that you can build upon the previous classes. The classes will kind of go as follows. Class 1, Setup and Prerequisites, which is what you're watching right now. And then from there we'll build on the following: 3-axis milling, 4-axis milling, 5-axis milling, 2-axis turning, turning with subspindle and live tooling, turning with multiple turrets and or B-axis heads. And of course these classes, as you already know, are free on YouTube. Also in 2025, we'll be offering one-on-one Zoom training for companies that would like their programmers to learn GibbsCAM, and this will be, of course, tailored to their company, or we can do our general training. The link will be more in the description below. So kind of let's get started on here with the prerequisites and kind of how I have mine set up here. Of course, I do a lot of training, so with training there I don't have too many customized menus up here. This is the default menus here, so we'll just kind of start with that. So we're not going to worry about OptiCam, that's the wire EDM. We're not going to focus on that at this time, but let's go up to the help menu. And you can see there's a number of icons there. Let's first go click on the contents. That's going to bring up basically your manuals, your database of the manuals. You click on whatever you'd like. You can also do search, so you can search for something particular you would like to find, and that is the help menu. Under help, also you have getting started. We normally don't use that. That just gives a link to download the manuals. Now if we go to this button here that says on item, you'll notice your cursor has a little question mark next to it. And what that does is if you click on something, and it doesn't have to be just these menus here, it could be anything underneath as well, other menus. But if you click on, let's say this one right here, it's going to find that in the menu, in your help menu, your help viewer, and it's going to tell you how to use that. This option is turned on, show stock and origin. This one is the show geometry, that one there. So that's going to show you how to use that. Under the next one is the PDFs. This is just basically getting started or what's new. Not a whole lot of information there. This is online training here through Cognos. This is not through us, but this is through Cognos. The next one we have is GibbsCAM Copilot. Now in GibbsCAM Copilot, you can type in whatever you'd like. In this case, I'm going to type in, let's do something new like start geometry. So once you type it in, just click the cursor here, and it's thinking, of course. You can see the 3 little dots thinking there. And in a second, it's going to bring up its answer for you. Of course, this is all AI, so you can see start creating geometry, and it has a lot of different choices down there. Okay. The next one under help is balloons. Now balloons, if I hover my mouse over there, you'll see it says Control B, so you can either turn it on here, or I find it easier just to hold the Control key down and click on B. Now what that does is when you hover your mouse over any of these icons, it brings up a pretty big note there. And it works with anything in Gibbs. Just about 99% of everything in Gibbs will have balloons attached to it. For instance, if I go to document control and I just hover my mouse over there, it'll tell you what should go in that box. Here, like I say, everything. And to turn that off, just Control B again, and that turns that off. And you won't have any notes on here, but notes up here you'll see. If I just hover my mouse over there, it brings up small little notes. So under help again, I have tooltips. So you'll notice when I hover my mouse over, it brings up a little note. It takes about 1 second to bring up the notes. That's what this is here, the tick delay. The normal default is 48, so if you click on that when you load your Gibbs, you'll see it's normally set for 48. So that takes almost a second. You can see 60 ticks equals 1 second. So I have 48 here. That's default. So it takes almost a second to pop that note up. You can see there's a little bit of hesitation, but it does pop up. If you want it faster, put in something like 2. And then as you hover your mouse over here, you'll see it pops up almost immediately. So that is tooltips. Next, under the help, of course, check for updates. You can see no updates are found. This is the latest one. Then the next one under help is about GibbsCAM. This just shows you your license and if it expires or not, what type of license it is, whether it's a dongle, network, whatever on there. So it'll give you information on that and what version you're currently running. So if you don't have check for updates automatically set to check, then you can always go to here and see what version you're running, or you can go to the GibbsCAM and download the latest version. Okay, with that, let's go on to the next menu. So the next menu is macros. Going to not go through all the macros here and what they can do, but macros are pretty powerful. You can set up a macro to, say, just import a vise and make it fit your stock around here, and I do have a tutorial on that on my YouTube videos. And you can create as many macros as you want to create specialized, customized things for maybe your company, that maybe a family of parts you do that changes. You can make a macro for that. So the next one, let's go to plugins. You can see most of these are active. If I don't have a part started, a lot of these will be grayed out here, but we're not going to go through everything on here, just some of the prerequisites here. So let's go to the plugin manager first. And some of these I already have checked off, but some you may want to check or on or check off. Now, if you're making your own MDD, you would turn on Machine Manager, but we're not going to do that here. Let's look through some of these here. If you have the Corel Plus tool library from Corel Plus Sandvik, you can check that on. Deburring process. This is more of a simplified deburring process than the 5-axis has. The 5-axis has a really nice deburring section in it. Git section. We used to use this for lathe, cutting lathe part in half with a solid model, but we have the profiler now, so normally I don't use the Git section on there. But if you want to use it, you can still check that off. Most of these we're not going to use. MDD power tools, if you're going to create your own MDD. This is specifically for Akuma turn cut here. Everything else here, pretty much I just leave default in here, so you shouldn't need to really load much of anything in there. So we'll just cancel that out there. Also under macros, or not, sorry, plugins, you have machine information. Now machine information will tell you what type of machine you have and the MDD, if you're using that or not. If I click on machine info, you can see it's just a 3-axis vertical mill. This is the key and the version and the revision here. This is just the standard 3-axis vertical mill and Gibbs. It's nothing special on here. So we'll just click on OK. Next one under plugins is Pathfinder. So if you're trying to find a specific file in Gibbs, maybe you need to move it, transfer it over to another folder, another version of Gibbs. You can do that by clicking, let's look in the plugins folder here and open the folder, and you'll see this is where it shows where that plugin is, the plugin folder. So the Pathfinder works pretty good. You can, if you're wondering where it keeps some of these things, the plugin Pathfinder here, VMM folder. There's the VMM folder. So you can find just about where anything is located by going to the Pathfinder on there. The next one is 3D Control Manager. So if you're running like a Space Mouse, which I am, which is really nice, I'd recommend everybody get that, that you can rotate your part around, move it, and zoom it up or down. So it makes it really handy working with Gibbs rather than having to use the roller wheel to move around or pan, having a mouse, Space Mouse ball, Space Mouse works really well. They make a number of different kinds. 3D Connections makes those. But anyway, you can control this, the sensitivity, rotation sensitivity, So this, you can kind of override what the default is when you load the Space Mouse in. Okay, that does it for the plugins. The next one is, of course, Window. That's if you have multiple sessions open, etc. You can cascade just like normal Microsoft Windows you can run. So really don't change much here or use much here on this window. Features, this is more hole recognition, hole wizard, that, but nothing to really set up for prerequisites here. The same thing with solids. There's really nothing to set up here. You can see these are all grayed out anyway, unless you click on a solid. The rest of these here really aren't anything to set up. So we'll go right over to File and down to where it says Preferences. So this is going to open up our preference menu here. And we're going to first click on Display here. So normally I don't want auto tool size. That it just extends the tool size basically in infinite. So I want to see exactly what the tool is and the length and things like that. So I don't use auto tool size. Now as far as appearance goes, let me move my part over just a little bit here so you can see what changes happens. So this is the display you're working on. You have the display, and then you have the OpSim display, which is right there if I go to OpSim. And then you have Machine Sim. If you have Machine Sim, you can use Machine Sim. But right now, this is called the display that you're working on. The window that you're working in, this is, of course, the display. Now you can create any color you would like on here, change the defaults here. And we'll have another video on how to do that more in depth. But right now, this is the default 2015 3DS. You can see if you want it to look like SolidWorks, you can do SW. You can see this looks kind of like the same colors that SolidWorks uses. You can choose some of the defaults here. I would not choose the OpenGL because that is if you have a really old computer that has a really old graphics card that doesn't use OpenGL. But any newer computer, probably within the last 10 years, has OpenGL, so I wouldn't choose any of that. But I have a couple here that I've customized here. I have this called Tim's. So you can see if I change that, I have my background change as well as the color of my part. And I have another one, 2024, which is basically almost the same. Now you can have the display different than you have when you go to, say, OpSim. If I went to OpSim, you can see that's using the 2024. Let's bring this back here. Let's go to this one here. So let's change this back here. So you can say, okay, when I'm doing the rendering, I want it this color. But when I'm doing the display and drawing, I can have it this color here. Or my other one here. This one is a little darker background. So you can change whatever you'd like on there. So anyway, that's under the display there, what you would like. And of course, we'll have another tutorial on how to do edit appearance settings. Okay, now you have the marker size here. I need to turn geometry to show you how that works. So let's just go to top view here. And let's bring up a tool in the cam, for instance. And just a contour with, say, a tool. So this is the marker size. Notice when you're working with geometry and you want to cut something, this is the marker size. You can see the two the black round one, white round one, black square, white square, direction arrows. This is marker size medium. If I have small, you can see how small they get there. And medium is normally what I work with. You can have large if you want. And you can have extra large, which seems to be really extra large. So those are pretty big. So normally I just put that on medium there. Okay, the printing, geometry and tool, screen on white. Now, if you print, say your screen or geometry or whatever, you can decide whether you want it screen on white or screen or black on white. So you'd have to print this out to see what your printer does. And then you can change that. Normally I just leave these default, same with the rendering on here. Now the wire drawing, I have the chord set for 1/1000ths. Normally you want to keep it about 1/1000ths. You don't want 1/10,000ths. This is what the solid body looks like. Let me just bring it up here, turn off our geometry. This is what the solid body looks like when you bring it in if you're working with solids. So normally you don't want it really small. Let me just change that to 0.1 and click apply. And this means when you bring your part in, that's going to be at 0.1. So let me just change this actual part here, just by going to properties and change this to 0.1. And you'll see how it looks. Doesn't look very good. So if you have this set to 0.1 and you bring in a solid model, that's what it's going to look like. Okay, let me change this to 10 thou. Looks a little better, but still a little chunky on the radiuses and that. So if I have mine set to 0.1 thousandths, let's just change this to 0.1 thousandths as well. And I click apply. You can see now your part looks pretty good, pretty smooth. So there's really no need to set this at 1/10 thousandths. The only time you would probably do that is if you have something the size of a pinhead that's really super small. But increasing this chord height will make your file size bigger, not your G-code output, but just your file size in general when you're saving it. So 1 thousandths is pretty good for most sizes, from say 1/2 inch part size to maybe 4 foot by 4 foot. Then if you get really huge, then you may want to adjust this a little bit, but 1 thousandths is pretty good as default. Okay, now the grid brightness, if we turn on the grid brightness, you can see the grid there. And usually how I have it is just so I can barely see it. You can see I can slide this and you can see it gets really dark, or all the way to the left it pretty much disappears. So I just kind of have it so it's just barely starting to turn black there. So that's kind of how I like it. And that looks pretty good. You can still see the coordinate system and it doesn't get in the way of everything else underneath, the geometry or dimensions or whatever. So it works, that works pretty good there. We're not going to change the tool sim settings or edit settings. I just leave these all default for now. That's pretty good what they have it set to, so we won't mess with that. Okay, the next one is, we went through marker size, printing. The next one is interface. Let's click on that. A lot of menus here. Most of the time I leave pretty much everything default. We'll show you what some of these menus do if you do change them. Let's bring my model down here. So start maximize is just like pretty much any Windows program. If you open up Gibbs and it's small, then you have to click on this maximize button up here to fill the screen. Well, I just want it to fill the screen already when I click on it. Transparent dialogues, these are all the dialogues. I don't really need them transparent. I just keep the opacity at 100%, so we'll just leave pretty much everything I have here as default. Now what the Windows snap positioning means, let me just show you what that is. So if I bring up this menu here, solids menu, let's click on here and here. You can see if I bring this menu here close to this one, the corner, it'll snap to it. As you can see, it snaps. Maybe this one snaps as well on there. Okay, let's bring up another menu, say work groups. Let's get this over here. So dialogues roll up. You'll notice there's a little push pin here. Now some people like to have their work groups up and their coordinate systems up. You can see you can expand this out so you have different work groups or layers, as some people refer to them. And maybe they kind of get in the way, so you don't want to move them around, spread them around. So if you click this little button here, as soon as you move your cursor off, you can see it rolls up. So that's dialogue roll up. So some people like to have that on, some don't. But that's totally up to you what that does. Okay, dialogue, follow application. You'll notice these 3 dialog boxes I have here. If I move the main one, notice the others will follow. So I like to have that checked. Okay, this just locks the solid and surface palettes. Okay, on some of these here, we'll just leave that default there. Won't go through anything on that. The constrained dialogues to screen, we'll just leave that default. Floating toolbar transparency, we'll leave that there. Let's see if I click on or unclick that, you'll notice this floating toolbar transparency now that it really isn't grayed out somewhat. If I enable that, you can see it somewhat graze it out until I hover my mouse on top of it and activate it. So that's kind of what that does. Tile list transparency. This is your tile list over here, over here. If I click on that, you can see that also. Kind of graze them out. You can set the opacity on that as well. And when you bring your cursor over there, it highlights it. Normally I just like to have it off so I can just see it where it's at. Now current part level 2, I don't think I've ever changed this in the 20, 30 years I've been doing Gibbs. So this is level 2. This depends on what menus you see across the top and on the side, depending on what you purchase in your license. So normally we just keep this at level 2 and open the part in the current level. So that's fine. So what the targeting pixels mean on the selection down here, 5, that means if your cursor, turn on geometry, if your cursor is within 5 pixels of a line or a point or something, if you click on it, it will snap to it. Let me turn off Cam and Tools. It'll highlight. So you can see I'm within 5 pixels there. Same with geometry, same with pretty much anything I check. So you don't want to really put this down. The default really works well, so I wouldn't change that. I've had some customers tell me when they click on something, it clicks the totally opposite thing. That's because I think they had 50 in there, so 5 works very well. Just leave the floor wall tolerance at 10. That's default as well. Blend tolerance, just leave that alone. Now you can go to always show tool preview on hover. I really don't have that checked on, but if I had tools on here, you can see as you hover over your tool, it'll bring up the tool in a description. So if you give it some information here on the tool, if you give it some comments down there, it'll show up there as well. Okay. Normally I don't have that on, but that's totally up to you. Now what zoom to cursor is, you really want that on, and I'll show you why. Let me move this menu out of the way. Let me put this over here. So I'm going to uncheck zoom to cursor. So let's say I want to zoom up this little area here on this ear. So if I have my cursor over here and I start to zoom, you can see it goes off the screen. Then I have to pan, then again I have to pan. Okay. So what zoom to cursor does, if I turn this back on, wherever your cursor is, it zooms up where the cursor is. So if I have my cursor right there, you can see it zooms up, pretty much stays where the cursor is. So you really want to have that on. The next one is, bring this back over, open process dialog on upload. Oh, also, before I go on, zoom to mouse cursor. Some CAD programs are exactly opposite, using your middle mouse wheel to zoom up or down. Some CAD programs have it reverse, so you can always click on this reverse if you want it to do just the opposite. Okay, so you don't have to get used to the zoom wheel differently on Gibbs versus other CAD programs. Okay, open process dialog on upload. Now if you worked with Gibbs, this will be familiar with you. If you haven't, then anytime you want to have an operation, you want to go back to make any edits to it. Normally, if I have this off, let me turn this off. Normally, if you double click it, you can see it brings the process back. Then you have to double click the process to make the changes, then click redo. Let me clear this out. But with open process dialog on upload, anytime I double click an operation, it'll bring back that process and automatically open the window. So you can make any changes you want, click redo. So it works with any operation. You just double click it, brings this window open. So that's open process dialog on upload. Okay, the next one is activate machining coordinate systems on upload. Basically the same thing. If you have multiple coordinate systems, we don't have any set up here. But if you have multiple coordinate systems, by double clicking on the operation, it will automatically move to that coordinate system. Different plane on here will automatically load that coordinate system on the upload. Otherwise, you have to go to the coordinate systems up here and go to the coordinate system that you created down here. So it just saves you a little bit of time on that. Automatic check for updates on startup. So this is kind of almost the same as under the help where you check for updates. although this does it automatically. So as soon as you start Gibbs, it'll automatically check for updates on the startup. We also have this new one. This is in version 25, mouse drag, limited to right to left and left to right. I have a video on that already. This depends on, this kind of shows you how, let me turn off this solid here. Depending on if you go from left to right, holding shift key down, left to right, or right to left, well, depending on what it's selecting there. So I have another video on that. You can go through that. But normally I just leave it from right to left. Okay. Usage statistics, if you want Gibbs to see what you're clicking on, it doesn't record anything that you've been working on. It just records mouse clicks. So they can change menus around for, and maybe put more menus up here for what people click on more. So if you want to opt out, just click on no and click OK. And the license update, this is where you go to update your license. So if you're moving from version 2024 to 25, you go through the run registration tool and it'll update your license. Anything in between, say version 2024 and all the updates, you don't have to do a license update. You just load the new version. It's when any major version that comes out, you need to do the license update. So from version 23 to 24, you need to do that. 24 to 25, you'll need to do that. And 25 to 26, you'll need to do that as well. Okay, next is machining preferences. So default mill, cutter radius comp, the last used. You can see you can choose tool center, tool edge, last used. I would just keep this default off, or just last used. Same with default lathe, last used. Normally Gibbs calculates the tool path based on the diameter of the tool, say in this case for milling. So that's usually the way it's always been, and that's how, so it should be good. Shouldn't need to change that. The holder class menus, you can decide whether you want to uncheck these or not. This just eliminates all the tool selections when you're creating a tool. So for here, I don't see too many BT35s or BT60s. Not very common. Same with Captos. Use a lot of Captos in mainly MTM type machines. CAT, you don't see too many CAT 35s or 45s or 60s, so I uncheck those. DIN holders, you can see HSKs, NMTBs. So you can decide what you want to see when you choose a tool or not. As you can see, when you create a tool, it's not going to ask you there. This is going to ask you cutter radius, comp number, things like this. But in your document control, this is where you choose what type of tool you have. You can see there's your list of different tools. So we'll just leave what these are checked, how I have them there. Ignore lathe max feed moves. Okay, uncheck that. Legacy tool, we don't want to use that legacy tool, so both of these are unchecked. Enable background material calculator. This does take a little more computing power if you have this on, but this calculates what material is left every time you cut, so it's kind of good to have this on. Solid to facet body conversion tolerance, I just leave this default at 5 thou. Hole wizard, we're just going to leave these alone. These are default here. This whole data preference here, just leave these default here. You can always change them if you go into the features menu up here. The same menus will appear up here. So we'll leave these alone. Same with hole manager. We'll leave these default here. And 5-axis preferences, we'll leave this default as well on here. And it gives you a little explanation here if you hover your balloon mouse over here. But we'll leave these all as default. Next one is file. So the undo memory is 20 megabytes. So that is, if you make a mistake and do Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, it'll go back in memory. That is, unless you click a save. If you click save, then that basically starts over again. So if you made a mistake, you can keep doing Control Z till you're back to where you have it. Rest of these, leave default. Alert, you can click on alert if you're overwriting a post output file. So if you posted something, make any changes and go to post, and it's going to tell you, hey, you already have something with the same name. Do you want to overwrite it? Of course, that's up to you. launch new application on file. So if you go to Windows Explorer and you see a Gibbs file, VNC file, or a new file, you can double click on it and it will automatically launch Gibbs. You can use default part when opening non-VNC files. Okay, usually I leave all three of those unchecked. Now the cut data path, this is the default path here. So if I click on browse, you can see this is the default path. There's the cut data there. And you can always click on that if for some reason you don't have it or can't find it. You can just go to there and do that. Cut data database. For your feeds and speeds are set in Gibbs, but they're totally customizable. So if you happen to customize your tools for cutting specifically how you like to cut the tools, you can save that in the database. And then when you load Gibbs, you can just go to browse and find that database, and you don't have to use the default one that Gibbs has. Font directories, usually it's just the Windows fonts. I really never change that. If you have some custom fonts, you can always put them in this directory, and then they'll show up as well there. We're going to leave this default, additional VMM, all this off. Accelerated process loading, we'll leave this checked to accelerate the process. And let's go to the next one, import export. So Gibbs normally uses the extension NCF when you post to a code. Now some machines require a different extension on there. Some require CAM. Some require MPF, like Siemens controls, or SPF for subprogram files. So you can change this right here. So if you don't like the NCF extension, you can change that to whatever you want, whatever extension you want. The standard extensions for different models, 3D models and 2D models, they have the extensions on there, DXF, text, XM, XMT, SAT, etc. on there. The default translator, SolidWorks, since Gibbs works on the same 3D engine as SolidWorks does, there's really no need to import a SolidWorks file or convert the file. It just automatically opens it. And Inventor's SAT is SAT, so the Inventor files, you can open that as well. That's standard in the Gibbs now. Okay. Next one, AutoSave. Now normally if you are working on a part that's maybe taken you all day to program, I always enable AutoSave. And usually I have it from 5 minutes to 10 minutes on here. Because if you do something wrong and crash your machine, or I've seen it before, if you're saving over the server and for some reason the server has a glitch when you're saving it and you've lost it, then having AutoSave on will kind of help you, but in that case, you want as backup file on. So that way it'll save two files, the name you gave it, and then it'll save a backup file. It'll have BU in front of the name, so you'll have a backup file. So if you're working on a big project that you don't want to really lose by doing something wrong, always have this backup file checked, and that way it'll always have two files there. You can have auto delete on if you want, but usually I uncheck that. And if everything's fine, I always have a backup file just in case for some reason the file got deleted by someone. You always have a backup file. You can also do a save on idle and some of these other menus here. Okay, we'll leave those alone. Coordinate systems, I always leave these unchecked. These are just default is unchecked here. You can do balloons on if you want to know more about the new CS and self-definition, that kind of stuff. Okay, post-processor comments. Now when I post code, the G code, I want to see some things in the G code, but I don't want a lot of clutter in there because that can get pretty lengthy on some of the comments, things like that. So I really don't need to know the length in characters, feet, and meters. Basically, that was some that went by the old tape machines, and that's how some CNCs still think of file sizes by characters, feet, or meters. I uncheck all those. You can look in your file size when you save it to see how big it is, to see if it's going to fit in your machine. So I really don't need it at the end of the program to tell me that. Subnumbers check. Tool comment, I like to know what tool I'm using, tool number and type. I don't care what work group I'm in. That doesn't really help me with the posted code out on the machine to tell me what work group I'm in. But I do like to know the operation comment, operation number and type. I don't need to know if I'm programming in absolute or incremental. Gibbs 99% of the time runs in absolute, so you don't need it to tell me if I'm in incremental or absolute. It's just a default there anyway, what it programs. I don't need it to tell me number of parts I've done. I just, of course, press cycle start if I want to do a second part. So nothing there. Starting tool state, this is kind of hanging over probably from the late 80s when you could not have the same tool in the spindle as the first tool you call up. It would bring up an alarm, especially on FANUC controls. So this doesn't need to tell me anymore. They've overcome that with machine tools, so you don't need to check that. Special functions, you don't need that either, but I'd like to know the date and time, format, name of my post processor, the code, any comments I put in my program, and the program name. Okay, next one is COM setup. This is if you're running RS-232, which is very seldom anymore. It's kind of gone away. USB or networking seems to be the norm now. But if you do have a RS-232 setup, you can give it a name here. And your baud rate, you need to have the baud rate matched to your machine. Whatever your machine is set to, you need to have the baud rate set to that. If you're running a cable, make sure you have a good cable, especially if you're going up to these really higher numbers here. If you have a bad cable, you're going to get bad data through the cable into your machine and possibly a crash. So make sure this matches, even, odd, none match, bits. Normally it's always 7 bits and 1 bit, X on, X off. So make sure all these match your machine. Intermediate tooling, we're not going to really go through that. But if you have chucks and fixtures you want to bring into your milling program, you can keep them in Gibbs in a certain place. So when you run intermediate tooling, you can find them pretty easily. So usually just have it set to system. You can always click user if you want to put them all in a specific place, but normally I just have them in the system is fine. Now the G-code editor, I like to use the internal editor. It works really well. You can have no G-code editor, so it won't pop anything up when you post code, but normally you want to look at the code before you actually send it to the machine, so I like the internal editor. Now if you want to have a different application open your code once you post it, you can click on application. And the default's Notepad, Notepad's kind of simple, but you can use a lot of different ones, Predator, Simco, there's a lot of different ones out there if you want some advanced editing capabilities, but otherwise internal editor works really well. Okay, next is document control. We did the file preferences, close that. So under document control, this is where you're going to choose your machine. As you can see this drop down arrow, I have a number of different machines. There's all kinds of them in the world. We're going to stay with 3-axis vertical mill for the first few classes on these tutorials. And of course the material database, this is using your material database there. There's your database. Of course this is customizable. You can create your own alloy as well, your own material. Your alloy group, you can see low, medium, depending on what you choose up here. This will show up as well differently. You also have your stock size and origin. This is where you put your stock size in, or your material you're going to start with. Part offset, we'll explain that more when we get into more machine sim. This is your class, mill class. This is your drop down menu for your mill class, and clearance for your part, how close you want to get to your part before you start machining it. Let me bring this down a little bit. And of course, most people are running in inches in the US. If you're running over in Europe, millimeters is the norm over there. And not too many people here that I find in the US are running in millimeters, but that's totally up to you what you'd like to do. Okay, next is comments. You can put a part comment in here and it'll show up in your G-code, or just comments here when you're starting a new part, and your programmer notes as well on here. So you can put whatever you'd like in either one of these. Now a couple other things on here. Machining preferences. Spline machining, normally I set that at 1/10,000th. If you're machining a spline, there is no G-code for a spline. It's either G1s, G2s, or G3s, or of course G0s. So when you're cutting a spline, it's going to be made up of a lot of G1 moves. So if you're creating an arc or a parabolic that's made up of splines, you want that as smooth as possible. So usually I put 1/10,000th in there. Material tolerance, just leave that default at 10 thou there, and the rest of these are just default numbers there. Nothing really changed over here on that. Okay, let's close that. Okay, a couple things on the main menu here. Over here on your tool list menus, you can just right click and you can see that it's set for large icons. If I set this for small icons, you can see how things get small both on the operation list and the tool list and process list. So I kind of like them on large icons there. The next one is up here on whether you want this to show up or not, is your color mode. So you can see these, none of these have colors, the tools and that. If you want to match the colors to the tools when you're rendering, you can see when you're rendering, these will have the different colors in there. If I was to render this, let's just go to ISO view on here. You can see the different tools match the color over here. Tool 1 is red. We're on tool 2 now, and that's kind of yellow on there. That gets more into some of these other additional functions here. But if you have this turned on, you can see T1 matches red. That's over here. T2 yellow. T3 this color here. So you can see as you go through. So you can decide how you want this on. Whether you would just want op toolpath mode on for colors, or the actual tools on the left side as well. Okay, so that kind of finishes our menus for setup and prerequisites. And the next class after this will be actually how to start this part from start to finish. And the first thing we're going to do is learn how to use geometry. So that'll be in the next class after this one. So stay tuned and watch for that. And thanks for watching.